Hi, I'm Christopher Scott, and welcome to the Kid and Friends podcast. Today, I am joined by Dr. Jason Del Gandio. Am I saying that right?
Good. Yep.
Excellent. Dr. Gandio has a PhD in communication studies and has been studying vibes for approximately 30 years. He's a published author, an award-winning teacher, and an engaged intellectual. Uh, we all refer to and experience vibes on a daily basis, but few people take the time to define, explain, or understand the phenomenon. Today's conversation will help us get a better understanding of the vibe. Dr. Jason has appeared on television and radio and has been quoted in the New York Times and Philadelphia Inquirer and speaks at public venues and facilitates workshops for community members. A mouthful. Welcome to the show, Doctor or Jason. It's gonna be
Either one is fine.
It's gonna take a minute
Thanks for
not
having
to
me
call
on.
you
I
that.
appreciate it. As we said before, we got started here. I'm very irreverent, very sarcastic. So if you're gonna use
Perfect.
doctor, make sure you do it in a humorous way.
You
Right?
are in
So
the right
I'm laid
spot
back.
then. So I'll tell you what. So last night I started watching a couple of your videos. I know you have the 20-minute vibe and some of the stuff on there. The very first video I picked up, I clicked on and it looked like it was yourself and two other doctors. And you guys were on the kind of the bottom of the screen and all the stuff was going on. And I watched it for a minute. I'm like, oh man, I might be out of my depth on this one. Right. And then I switched to a couple other videos and I saw how personable you were and completely different conversations. And I'm like, okay, that's more in tune with what I can handle and what I can do. Are you a professor at University of Temple or Temple University?
Yeah. So I'm a college professor at Temple University, obviously in Philadelphia. At Temple University, my expertise is the theory and practice of social justice.
Okay.
So I essentially study how human beings create social change. However, outside of Temple, as you were saying before, my other expertise is vibes. So I've been studying vibes since my late teens. I know it sounds strange to people and whatnot, but
Right.
at an early age, I took an interest in this thing we call the vibe. And I kind of approached the vibe as a site of intellectual investigation. In other words, everyone talks about vibes all the time. We have
Right.
a gym called Good Vibes,
Yeah.
right? So why do we use this term? What do we mean by it? How come no one tries to define or explain it? Is this a real thing? Is it just a metaphor? And that's kind of the world that I live in terms of vibes.
Gotcha. And to put it in perspective with my gym, I get a lot of people that come in and the environment I have, even though we're beating the life out of each other on a daily basis, everybody's really nice. And we have all these people that come in and they train with us. And we're one of those gyms that we just get visitors all the time from all over the place. Like I'll have people walk in the door from out of nowhere, haven't not contacted me prior, and they're like, "Hey, can I train with you guys?" I'm like, "Yeah, why not? Who cares?" And every time somebody leaves, the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, "You guys live up to the name." And the
Wow.
vibe is that we're going to be a hard place to train, but we're going to treat you right while we're here. And I think that goes a long way. Like the vibe for me is the environment, like how people are training together, how they're dealing with each other, how they interact with each other. And from what I gather from you, like that parlays into all kinds of life events, like sporting events. It could be in your work environment. It could be all kinds of stuff. And the vibe is not the same for everything and everywhere. And I'm hoping you're going to enlighten me a little bit on some of the stuff that you've discovered over the last 30 years. So, what's the vibe
Sure,
to
sure,
you?
sure. Good question. I'll begin with in the simplest way. I'll define vibes as the exchange of energy between you and other people. So again, the exchange of energy between you and other people.
Right.
Right. Let me give some examples first, and we'll break that open that definition. Right.
Sure.
So think of a first date.
Yep.
Right. And one of the things you're looking for in a first date is the connection between you and the other person. And a lot of times you will use the word vibe to explain that connection.
Sure.
Now, of course, on that first date, there'll be all kinds of vibes: good vibes, bad vibes,
Right.
romantic vibes, sexual vibes, turn off vibes, all kinds of stuff. But
Yeah.
that's one of the ways we evaluate that
Right.
first
Like, how
interaction.
many times have you heard somebody go on a date and like, how was the date? And they're like, oh, we just didn't vibe together.
Right, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
right, right.
Okay.
And then the question for that, and I'll circle back to that in a second. The
Yeah.
question then becomes like, well, how are they using that word? Right? And what do they mean by that use of that word? Right?
Sure.
Is it just kind of throwaway term, a catchphrase, or does vibe refer to something like an actual phenomenon?
Right.
Right? That's one example, like a first date. Then another example might be, let's say you get into an argument with your best friend or someone with a family member, right? And the vibe is all off. Could be for a couple of minutes, couple hours, could be for weeks,
Right.
right? But the vibe isn't right, right? Something's amiss between you guys, right?
Sure.
And that's a bad vibe, right?
Yeah.
Then you said earlier, like music, for instance. Music's obviously a big part of the vibe, right? So you're at a show, you're at a concert, the band on stage is killing it, right? They're rocking out. You turn to your buddy, like, man, this vibe, this place is off the hook,
Right.
right? And like another example of that. And that parlays into, let's say, sports, right? So baseball, football, basketball, let's pick any sport you want, right? And then think about that. Think the experience. So it could be 10,000, 20,000, 80,000 people. You're all cheering for your team, and there's a certain kind of electricity in that stadium. You can literally feel that energy,
Right.
right? Right? Or a work environment. Let's say you're at a work meeting, right? Let's say 10 people in the room, 15 people in the room, and it's a bad work meeting. The boss slash manager is on everyone's case, this, that, and the other thing. You turn to your colleague, man, the vibe in here is bad. It's a bad vibe,
Yeah.
right? And we have examples like this literally every day of our lives. And I would ask you or your listeners over the next week or so, take inventory of how often you either use the word vibe or you hear someone use the word vibe, right? And then ask yourself, like, well, what do I or do they mean when we're using this word?
Right.
So going back to my definition earlier, I said the vibe is the exchange of energy between you and other people. Now, of course, so let's break that open, right? So
Yeah.
when I say energy, I'm really just substituting one word for another. So vibe and energy, like all of a sudden they're the same thing,
Sure.
right?
I mean,
So the question then
intentions as well.
becomes,
Like, how many times have you met a stranger and you're just not quite sure of their intentions, and you're like, all right,
oh yeah,
I want to get away from this person because I don't know what they're going to do because I'm getting a bad vibe. Like,
100%,
all
right?
day
Yeah,
long, every day.
right, exactly, right. So the question becomes though, with this energy, it's like, well, what is the nature of this energy? So is it physical or metaphysical? Is it material or immaterial?
Hmm.
Is it spiritual or scientific? Or maybe it's all these things at the same time, right?
Right.
And I'm posing these questions because I want your listeners to think about this, right? Like, what exactly is this thing we call the vibe,
Right.
right? And then there, why is it such a popular phrase that we use all the time? And there are all kinds of vibes. So there's a common phrase in our society, like, good vibes only. Well, we all want good vibes,
Right.
right? No doubt about that. But as you were saying, there are all kinds of vibes: good
Yeah.
vibes, bad vibes, ugly vibes, chill vibes, so on and so on and so on. Right. And so that's kind of the world that I live in. I try to think about these things and try to help other people articulate their experience and their ideas about vibes.
Sure. And I notice, like, when I'm teaching a class, if I'm up and, like, meaning emotionally and mentally, the whole room is.
Sure.
Right? Because
Sure.
I'm leading the show, and everybody's staring at me from start to finish as I'm showing techniques or
Right.
whatever I'm doing. And some of my best classes are when I'm feeling great, right? And I watch that kind of go into the rest of the group, or the right music's playing,
Yeah.
and like a lot of things go into the vibe, right? Like, it's if you're in my environment, it's how I'm behaving, how others are interacting with each other. The music that's in the background could be just subtle enough they don't realize it's pumping them up, right? Like, there's a million things that could go on, and throughout the course of a day, like, you're running into situations where, like, even just shopping, right? You could have
Yep.
certain music playing that puts you in a relaxed state. You're just like, okay, I'm going to buy a little bit more. I'm going to spend more. Like the ambiance at a restaurant, right? That's all
Oh, yeah.
part of the vibe, right?
Oh, no doubt about it. Yeah. And I'm actually interested to talk to you about this because of what you do, right? So I believe you're a secondary black belt in jiu-jitsu, correct?
Yep. Yes.
Right. And so, look, I don't know anything about jiu-jitsu. I don't. I mean, other than pop culture knowledge, stuff
Right.
like
Right.
that.
Right.
But I would assume, though, when you're on the mat with someone one-on-one, there's a certain kind of exchange of energy going on there, and you're
Yep.
reading each other,
Sure.
right? You can feel it. It's not just what you see with your eyes or with your five physical senses. It's like the whole package is happening at once,
Yes.
right? And I would assume, though, whether you say it in this way or not, that you're trying to use your vibe to an advantage over this other person,
Yeah.
right? I
Often.
mean,
And here's the thing, like as a black belt, before we even like, and I'll give you kind of a breakdown how a class works, right? Like, you
right,
come in and you'll go through a warm up, you'll run through some techniques, and my classes are all an hour and a half. The last 45 minutes to a half hour is live wrestling. Like, we're gonna try to murder each other,
right.
and I'm a black belt, so there's a vibe to that, right? Like, if
Sure.
if you're a brand new person, you're like, I don't know what this dude's going to do to me. And sometimes that's just an advantage right off the bat. Like before I even shake
Sure.
hands with anybody, they're like, "Oh shit, you're going to destroy me." And I always have to say to them like, "Don't worry about it. Just do the thing you're going to do." Like 100% you're not going to beat me like cuz you're new and I have 30,000 of these matches,
Right.
right? Like there's no chance you're going to win, but I want you to put your maximum effort. Don't let what you're feeling from me put you off. And
Right.
that right off the bat gives me an advantage. And there's times when I'm literally beating the I was going to curse there, beating the crap out of some of my closest friends, and we're giggling during the whole thing, right? Like I'm literally doing the meanest possible thing I can think of doing, and this person's laughing because we're having a good time doing it.
Right. Right. Right.
And that
Mhm.
same feeling, like if you're a stranger and I put that same thing on you, you're not going to have that
Oh
same vibe.
no, 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 no. Very different. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm sorry.
Playing
Continue.
off of that, no, no, no. But playing off of that, I think it's a great, let's say, case study of the vibe. Right. Sort of about like a stare down between people.
Hmm.
Right? So I don't know how it works with the martial arts, but I'm thinking of like a boxing match.
Yeah,
So before the match starts, you stand in the middle of the ring, and there's a stare down,
yeah,
right? And you're literally using your vibe, your energy, trying to intimidate the other person. Meanwhile, you're trying to evaluate the other person's vibe. Like, does this person have any heart? Are they actually gonna,
right.
step up or not, right?
Yeah, you can
And I
feel it.
think heart, yeah, yeah, heart as an example, using you as an example here. So let's say you're a black belt going against the white belt. White belt's not going to win. But I would like to think though that the white belt might have some heart though. Like just getting on the mat
Yeah,
alone,
but sure.
right? And you can feel that, and you can feel when someone has heart or doesn't have heart,
Right.
right? And that's different than a skill set. You could have a great skill set,
Yeah.
but once you get punched in the face, then and
Sometimes
now it's
you got to
different,
have a little
right?
heart to go with it to take the
Right,
punch.
right. And I would say that the two people engaged in I guess they call it a match, right?
Yeah.
You can feel each other out,
Yep.
but then the crowd can feel that as well, right? I mean, people standing on the outskirts of
Oh,
that
for
mat
sure.
watching the match, right?
Yeah.
And then it's not there's a reason why most sports fans root for the players who have heart. Even if they're not great players,
Yep.
you root for them because you can feel their passion, their
Yes.
competitiveness, their 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 desire to win, even if they're not the best at it.
Yes.
Right? That's all part of the vibe. I mean,
And
100%.
I will spend more time watching somebody who's got a lot of heart than a lot of skill. Right? Because the guy who's got a lot of heart's going to probably pull off something that you're not expecting, and he's going to give you a bit more of a show because
Sure, yeah, yeah.
he's willing to deal with it. And at the stare off, like talking about the vibe, like if you have two guys looking at each other and one guy won't make eye contact or look away, like that's part of his vibe, right? Like he's just like,
Yep.
okay, you can sense that you're kind of already in the person's head.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Then one question you might think about for yourself in what you do and as a teacher and trainer, like how might you help cultivate certain kinds of vibes for the people that come to your gym? So you're saying this earlier, like the
Yeah.
overall atmosphere is very inviting, very friendly, but in terms of a competitive edge,
Right.
right? How do you learn to use the vibe to elevate your game, to elevate your skill set, to elevate your performance when it
Yeah.
counts?
Well, it's funny because I get a lot of my guys who've been training with me for a long time. They'll say, "Oh, you've created this incredible environment to train in." And my comment all the time is, "It's not me. Like I may have started it, but it's got a life of its own now." And everybody in here has that same sort of philosophy where if you're a guest and you're coming in, you feel it immediately.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So it perpetuates itself. It doesn't necessarily
Right.
need me anymore. It's got its own life to its vibe.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And so to break that down for a moment, right? So each person gives off a vibe, right? But then when we all get together, there's a collective vibe.
Right.
Right? So you have one vibe walking down the street, but then when you're with your family, that's a different collective vibe. Then when you're at the gym, that's a different collective vibe. When you're hanging with your buddies, having a beer on a Friday, that's a different kind of collective vibe, right?
Right.
And so I invite your listeners to think about the vibe, not just in terms of like what's the vibe I'm giving off, but think about it in terms of everyone's giving off a vibe all the time.
Yeah.
There's also a collective vibe there, and each kind of situation has its own collective vibe.
Well,
So earlier, when I was talking about like the work environment or sports or music,
yeah.
that's a collective vibe.
Well, let's take the Eagles Super Bowl into a
Oh,
conversation, right? Like every time somebody wins a major event, like people are just trashing like cities, like right there, and it's not something they would do on their own. They're caught up in
right,
this vibe of what's happening, and they're not maybe not reacting like they normally would, but they're
right,
caught in the moment and the sense of collective. well-being or vibe is pushing people to do these things or behave a certain way.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You get caught up in the moment. This kind of energy has a momentum to it,
Right.
right? And if you're not, and that's actually, this is actually important. If you're not reflective about the collective vibe, that can lead to bad things.
Yeah.
It can lead to good, but also bad things, right?
Sure.
It's almost like you're swept up in the moment, not thinking about like, wow, maybe this is not the best thing to do. And then you wake the next day, like, I can't believe I ever did that, but you only did it because of the collective phenomenon that you were a part of.
Right. And you could get the vibe off a ton of things, like just a song, listening to it, right? Like,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's amazing. Like there, I was teaching class yesterday, and there's a little girl who's always making noise, and she's always on the side, and she's a sweet little girl. But Barbie Girl came on, right? And
Right.
she's over there dancing by herself. And I look at her dad, and he's like, "Yeah, she loves this song." I played that song like 6 times in a row, and this kid was so happy on the way out, and nobody in the room cared because they were watching how happy this girl was playing with the
Sure,
song, and it elevated everybody's mood
sure.
versus just that one particular person. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
interesting. And how did you get started with the vibe for starters? Like you said, you started being interested in it 30 years ago. Like something occurred? Was it like a moment, then you just kind of observed it and like, oh, okay,
Yeah, so I'll back up even before then. So I grew up in a household where the word vibe was used quite often. My biological parents at an early age, I was born in '74, so like coming out of the
okay,
hippie age, things like that.
yeah,
So, the vibe was everywhere,
right,
right? Like that's the back story. But then in my late teens, I got involved in a variety of, let's say, subcultures, countercultures, like early New York City rave scene,
mm-hmm,
jam bands, underground parties, after hours parties, all kinds of wild stuff.
okay,
And everyone in these scenes was using the word vibe, including me, like the vibe of the DJ, the vibe of the band, the vibe of the dance floor, all that kind of stuff. And at some point, though, it struck me, it's like, well, we're all using this word, but no one's really defining or explaining it.
right,
And so, really, at the age of maybe 18 or 19, I first took an interest in this thing we call the vibe.
mm-hmm,
Right? Then I wrote my first paper on the vibe in a college class my senior year. It was a class on nonverbal communication. And I was like, well, this is nonverbal, so I'm going to write a paper about the vibe.
right,
Then I went to graduate school. I used both my master's thesis and my doctoral dissertation to construct a philosophy of the vibe that I refer to as bodily emanation. So the body emanates or radiates an actual feeling or energy that is felt and experienced by other bodies.
okay,
And so then I graduated from grad school in 2002. So that's cool. So 22 years ago,
right,
something like that. So quite a
okay.
long time
And
ago.
then you've been studying it ever since.
Yeah, on and off. I mean, so it depends on whatever I got on in my life here and there.
Right.
But in the past few years, I decided to go back to it, like, full throttle here and sink myself into it and doing podcasts like this and trying to talk to people and just, share my knowledge and whatnot with other people.
Awesome. And you were talking about different styles of vibes. You have an individual vibe, group vibes. There's more. I saw it on when I was following some of your stuff. Like, give me a little bit more information on the other types. Like the group one is kind of easy to understand. Like,
For sure.
but I'm sure there's ones that are a little bit more complicated and not so obvious.
All right. So we might get a little abstract here. So
That's all right.
just bear with me. Right. All right. All right. So the way that I see it, right. And let me back up for a moment. Anything I say about the vibe, I'm not saying as absolute truth.
Sure.
This is my interpretation, right? It's kind of a theory and philosophy. I could be wrong. And I say that because there are a lot of people out in the world that just want to sell you snake oil, for
Yeah.
instance, and that's not who I am,
Right.
right? It's like take everything I say with a grain of salt. At the same time, I invite your listeners again to think about this on their own terms.
Yeah.
Right? So, having said that, so I begin with the human body and argue that the body itself emanates or radiates a vibe,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then once you have that idea in your head, though, it's like, well, that means all human beings all across the planet are giving off a vibe all the time,
Sure.
right? So you have, let's say, a one-on-one conversation. Now that's a group vibe right there.
Right.
Then you have maybe your family or dinner, or let's say a lunch together, or let's say you're at a church, right? So you have a small group setting,
Mm-hmm.
which is also or let's say at your gym,
Yeah.
right? But then you can have a large group vibe. So like I was saying earlier, let's say a music concert or a sporting event where there's maybe 100,000 people.
Right.
All those bodies are vibing on each other, right? But then each town has a vibe. Each city has a vibe, right? So the vibe of New York City versus that of Miami versus that of Chicago or San
Completely different.
Francisco, etc. Right? They're all different,
Yeah.
right? Then I'm like, well, and if that's true, that's like, what about regional vibes? So let's say we live in the Northeast.
Yeah.
compared to so I was out in Portland, Oregon back in May.
Okay.
Very different vibe out there.
Yeah.
The whole region, not just Portland, that whole area of the country has
Yeah.
its own vibe. And then from there, it's like, well, if that's true, right? Does each country and culture have its own vibe? So American culture versus Canadian culture versus French culture versus Chinese culture, so on and so on and so
Right.
on. And then from there, it's like, well, if each body's giving off a vibe and there are bodies all across the planet, is there then a global vibe that you
Yeah.
can kind of tap into in one way or another,
Sure.
right? And if there is a global vibe, in my mind, it also acts like a form of like an existential guide. So the vibe isn't just that I emanate something, but we're all pushing and pulling each other in certain
Right. You're
directions. It's like
receiving
the right,
vibes as you're putting them out as well.
exactly, right? And so it's like this mesh or a nexus of vibes that you can align yourself with, attune yourself to, and then use that as a guiding force, making decisions,
Right.
who to talk to, how to move, where to move, and so on.
Okay. So, I mean, you could apply the vibe to a lot of stuff. Like you can go on Instagram and look at someone's picture, and there could be 1,000 mean comments under it. Like the vibe on social media right now is not the friendliest,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah, yeah,
people are
totally.
super judgmental, and some people are willing to put themselves out there, and some people are more reserved because of that vibe. And
Oh, totally, yeah.
like we're in like you mentioned, you deal with like social construct and a bunch of other stuff on a daily basis, but I would think that all applies to that as well, right? Like how people
Sure.
treat each other as a group, how we treat each other as individuals, and there's always that one guy when they walk into the room, like the room just lights up, right? Like or
Yeah.
like because like, all right, this dude's here, it's going to be a good time, right? Like you just know, right? Like you just know.
Right, right, right. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
all
yeah,
right, I'm
yeah,
starting
yeah,
to understand. Okay,
yeah. Now, I would also invite your listeners, though, to make analytical distinctions between certain kinds of experiences.
right,
That's what I mean by that, right? So you have emotion, then you have intuition, and then you have vibes, right? So when I say emotion, generally speaking, emotion is a psychological response to a certain set of circumstances,
yep,
and those could be real circumstances or perceived. Either way,
sure,
something happens. You have an emotional reaction, could be happiness, sadness, love, joy, fear, so on and so on and
right,
so on. Now, emotion is similar to vibes, but not exactly the same. So that's emotion, right? Then you have intuition, and a lot of people will use intuition and vibe in the same kind of way, but I would say they're not exactly the same. They're related, but not the same,
okay,
right? Why do I think? So, in my mind, intuition is when you allow your subconscious mind and your conscious mind to communicate with each other, right? So your
okay,
conscious mind is what you're aware of, right? So right now I'm aware that I'm looking at the camera right now,
right,
we're having a conversation. It's almost like a flashlight when you see what's in that circle of light.
yep,
But that doesn't mean everything else is gone. It's where your focus is. That's where your
right,
attention is.
okay,
Right? That's the conscious mind. The subconscious mind is all the things happening below your threshold of conscious awareness
right. You're
that
not aware
influence
how you're reacting to them. It's just
right,
what your body or mind is doing on its own.
right. So as you said that, outside my window, there's some random dog out there barking.
Yeah,
But I'm not really paying attention to that. That's still part of my environment,
sure,
right? And if I allow my conscious mind, if I soften my ego and soften my perception and soften my conscious mind, it allows the subconscious to come up there and gives me more knowledge to make choices.
right,
And again, tying back to what you do, that has to be part of jujitsu. Like when you're fighting somebody,
yeah,
it's like a weird balance. Like you're totally focused, but then totally relaxed at the same time.
right. And the intention's different, right? Like if I'm
Yeah.
wrestling with somebody, like they showed up there for that. I'm not just picking him out of a crowd and beating up on him,
Right,
right?
right,
So his vibe walking in is the understanding. Okay, I'm either gonna get my ass kicked or I'm gonna kick ass, and I'm okay
right,
with it either way. But the intention is the vibe in that particular instance, and during that roll, and we call it rolling in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Like during that roll, like how my energy, like I could be angry about something and be a little bit meaner on stuff, and somebody will pick up on that. Or I could just be doing my normal mean stuff and not have any mean intentions behind it, but I'm still trying to twist the person into the same ball I was trying to do two
right.
minutes ago. So that can change my how I feel about it. And if you catch me in an arm bar and you crank it at the end because you're mad, you know, I'm probably going to be upset, and you could catch me in the same armbar, and I don't feel that same intention from you. Like, I'm not going to be upset. I'm like, oh, that hurt a lot. Like it's.
Right, right,
I
right, right.
guess that's part of the. What were the three styles that you had? The vibe, intuition, and
Oh, so emotion,
yeah.
intuition, and vibes.
Does emotion is one of those stronger than the others, or they all kind of run
In what
together?
way? What do you mean by that?
Meaning,
In terms
like
of
a lot of people run
grounding?
on emotion. Like it guides them through their day. Like, and I'm not saying it's
Right,
good, and I'm not saying it's bad, but
right,
some people uh, don't take the subconscious stuff as well, and the stuff that's right in front of them will direct everything they do.
right, right, right. I think that would be relative to each person, how they're built,
Okay.
right? Um, so we all have emotions, obviously. We all have intuition. There's no doubt about that,
Yeah.
right? Uh, and if you're not mindful, if you're not reflective about your emotional states, if you're not mindful and aware of what's happening in your wider environment, that can have negative impacts upon you as a person.
Right.
And it's like you're just reacting all the time. You're not really in touch and in tune with your environment. You're kind of just rattling off the mouth. You're kind of just reactive all the time. And so, I mean, for me personally, speaking for my own self, kind of one of my life's goal is to be more grounded and more present,
Hmm.
right? Less inside my head. I know it's funny when I say that I'm intellectual, but
Yeah.
less. How do you lessen the psychological clutter? I guess you would say,
Right.
right? Um, and that's all part of the vibe as well. So when you encounter someone that has lots of psychological clutter, they give off a certain kind of vibe,
Yeah.
as opposed to someone who is more grounded, more present. That's a very different kind of vibe,
Yeah.
right?
Like a chill
Right,
being like somebody who's chill versus somebody
right,
who's over the top angry all the time. Like you're going to
right. Yeah, yeah,
feel
yeah,
that
yeah.
energy without even talking to them a lot of the time.
Right,
It's the way they walk, it's the way they talk, it's how they present themselves.
sure. So I safely assume you've definitely met people in your life that were just angry and negative all the time,
Yes.
and not just like in this moment, like they're just negative all the time,
Yep.
and it's like a drag to be around those people. They literally bring you down.
Yeah.
Right?
I've gone through my lifetime not having people like that in my life because the second I get those kind of vibes from people, like I immediately cut them out. Like I can still be friends with them, but we're not hanging out. I'm not spending time with you.
Right,
If you're calling me every day, I'm not answering all your texts or phone calls. Like people know, right?
right,
Like your closest friends you vibe with the best, right?
right.
And other people you could be all over the place with. So yeah, there's definitely people I've met where they're not who I want to be around because of just what I'm feeling, right?
Sure.
Like,
Right.
and I've gotten that with people I haven't even said two words to,
Yeah.
right? I could be at a party and get introduced to somebody, and like 2 seconds into, it, I'm like, not gonna waste my time on this person.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then from the other end, though, I safely assume you've encountered strangers, may have had a 5 minute conversation with, but you hit it off like within that 5 minutes. You guys
Yes.
were vibing together, super cool, super chill, like in the same headspace,
Yeah.
and you can feel that exchange. It's a very different experience.
Yeah. Like I went to the Tim McGraw concert last week in Philadelphia.
Mhm.
We got to our seats, and the kid sitting next to me had not autism, but he had Down syndrome.
Okay.
And I saw that he was in the seat next to me. We were best friends by the end of the show. Like this kid knew every word to every
That's
song.
awesome.
He was singing along. His dad was with him, and like this kid, and I say kid, he was probably like 30 something, but he just put off this vibe. Like I need to know this kid. I hugged him on the way out. Like, and
Awesome. Right. Yeah.
we'll never ever talk again, right? And I'm okay
Yeah.
with that. But he helped me have that experience. And when I think
Sure.
of my Tim McGraw concert, I think of this guy Jake who sat next to me, and he was awesome
Right.
to sit next to, and he helped me enjoy it even more.
Sure. And actually, to expand that, that's part of, let's say, fandom in general. So if you're a fan of the Eagles or the Phillies or fan of some band or some musician and you go to this live event, part of that experience is because you share certain things in common with each other, right?
Right.
And then psychologically, emotionally bond around that, and that itself evokes a certain.
I think your screen just froze up there. Wish I could remember where we were at in the conversation.
Yeah,
That's okay. It happens, right?
yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
I know it was at the 32-minute mark, so I'll be able to jump in and just re-edit that. Um, So with the vibe, I think we were talking about sports and teams,
Right.
and we'll just start from there, and then we'll piece it together, and things
Yep.
happen.
So yeah, sports teams. All right, let's actually start talk about teams. Right, that can work. Right.
Yeah,
So it's safe to assume that most championship teams have a good vibe on the team, which is not to say there won't be individual problems here and there, but like
sure,
there's a certain kind of collective intention that we're all in this together, right?
right,
We want to play for each other, right? We want to be the best that we can be. And that mindset produces a certain kind of collective vibe that in turn reinforces the mindset,
sure.
if that makes sense,
Yeah,
right? Like a
absolutely.
symbiotic relationship, right? And then as fans from the outside, we can feel that.
Right.
You can even see it, right? Like you can see it the way a team plays,
Yeah.
right? And one of the ways you can kind of see the vibe in action, not that you can actually see a vibe, but think of synchronicity,
Yep.
right? And when the team is in a flow, right, you can see it all happen. Like it's all happening. It's a strange phenomenon where it's improvisational at the same time. It's like following a script. Like it's almost preordained
Right.
and it unfolds for your eyes. So in the sports world, talk about like being in the zone.
Yeah.
That's being in the zone, right?
So the zone is
And
the
the zone,
vibe.
yeah, yeah. I mean, well, part of that's all part of the same conversation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And again, applying this to individual sports such as jujitsu, you can definitely be in a vibe by
Right.
yourself,
For
right?
sure.
And or you can be in a zone by yourself. And when you're in the zone, it's like you can't lose.
Right.
Everything you do is perfect.
Yeah.
And I don't want to talk out of turn here, but correct me if I'm wrong. I think the history of martial arts, that's part of the phenomenon, like trying to achieve that state of mind,
Yes.
right?
Eh,
More than just a physical action. It's like almost like a spiritual transcendence, almost,
well,
right?
it's
Where
funny that you
you
say that
don't,
because when I started jujitsu, I was one of those guys in my mind. I was the tough guy, right? Never lost a fight. I'm that guy.
right,
I'm that
right,
asshole, right? and and I started out and I wanted to be the guy who fought, and I was the tough guy, and first class got the shit beat out of me by little
really
dudes
tough.
like way smaller than me, just beat the crap out of me. I went home, my hands were shaking, and like I was all amped up. My wife's like, "How was it?" I was like, "Got the crap beat out of me. I can't wait to go back tomorrow." Like it's just the way I was, right? Like I was so excited because like my reality was crushed, but I needed it to be crushed, right? Like, and I started, and it eventually turned into a way of thinking, right? Like you get hit with this adversity while you're wrestling, and you're figuring out how much you can take. You're getting smarter at it. You're changing the way you like process things, and I started out as the guy who wanted to fight, and now I don't want to fight anybody, right? I enjoy wrestling and doing all that stuff that comes with it, but my attitude towards other people has completely changed in how I process things. And because of the environment I'm in, the vibe has taught me to behave a certain way subconsciously, right? Like you can be a stranger and you could walk up to me and threaten me. And honestly, at this point in my life, I'm just going to look at you. I'm like, okay, you're not really gonna do anything to me. Like I'm not
Right.
concerned. My reaction to you is different than it would have been in the past. Like, I'll have
Mhm.
friends, like close friends that have never trained a day in their lives. They'll be like, "Hey, you think you can take me in a fight?" I'm like, "Yes," before it's even out of their mouth. They're like, "How long do you think it'll take?" Seconds. They're like, "Well, why are you being so cocky?" I'm like, "I'm not cocky. I'm a product of the environment that I'm in. I understand what it is. So my vibe towards you is not angry about what you're
Right.
saying. It's an understanding that however you feel about whatever is not going to change the outcome, and I'm okay with that. And I think sometimes the vibe is taught. Sometimes it's expressed subconsciously, like you're talking about. Like, look at a football team, and like they could have a terrible season with a quarterback, whoever the leader of the team is. They get rid of that, and they put a new leader in who has
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
different energy to him, and it's a whole different
Sure.
team based off of one person who's leading it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. I'm getting a better understanding of the vibe, so I'll let you keep going.
Yeah. So, and then actually, let's talk about. So, you mentioned leadership, right? And so, leadership can be expressed in different kinds of ways. So, good communicator, good listener, knows how, if you're in the workforce, how to manage people properly, things like that. But then, at a deeper level, leadership also comes down to a certain kind of charisma the person has, where
Right.
people want to follow that person,
Yes.
right? That's a rare characteristic to have. Like not every like most people don't want to follow other random people,
Right.
right? Instead, a leader has to exude a certain kind of vibe, a certain kind of energy, right?
Yeah.
And then that's when you point like that person has leadership. And you can see it in little kids even like down the playground, they're just playing catch football, whatever it is. But like some kids stand out,
Right.
right? And this can be for all kinds of reasons, but some kids you can just see like that kid's going to be a leader one day.
Yeah. It's innate. It's part of them.
Right, right.
And
And
they,
that kid's giving off a certain kind of vibe.
yeah, and other people are attracted to it and they're willing to
Right,
follow along to a reason
right,
for a reasonable level of things. But
right.
if you meet somebody who inspires you, it's a lot easier to follow them if their vibe is akin to what you would like to feel in that moment.
Sure.
And sometimes you don't know you need to like it or you want to like it. It just happens. Right? A good leader can get you through things that you could have the same
Oh,
people
100%.
going through the same process and just change out one person
Yep.
and it's a whole different environment. And you see it with sports teams all the time,
Yeah, all the time.
right? You
Yep.
see it with companies, they'll fire a president or VP
Sure.
and or leader of the sales force, and you got a new person coming in, you got the same salespeople, just a different approach to them and a different technique how he's motivating them or his vibe
Sure.
towards them,
Right.
and they can work wonders all of a sudden even though nothing's changed.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And leadership, it can be cultivated and taught. Like some people do have innate natural leadership skills, so to speak.
Yeah.
But then once you're aware of that innate ability that you have,
Hmm.
you can spend time cultivating that. So like,
Right.
how can I be a better listener? How can I be a better communicator? How can I learn to use my charisma uh, in the right way, at the right time, with the right people, etc.
Right.
Right? And with that often comes things like honesty, integrity, right? Those are often also leadership qualities.
Yeah.
And when someone is honest, again, you can feel that off the person.
Yeah,
Like, I
absolutely.
mean, right? I mean, some people are BSers and some people are honest, and you can tell the difference.
Yeah, I mean, you go into a car dealer, right? Like
Yeah,
you get
100%.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
shady guy who's selling you a car, and you could buy the same car from two different people and have 100% different experience,
Yeah.
right? Like the guy who's a little bit shady, you kind of you're questioning your purchase the whole time, and you may have gone in for that specific car, and you have a different experience with a guy who's completely honest with you. He's telling you the actual price you want to hear, and
Right.
and the vibe that he's putting out is trust, right? Like,
Right.
and it is. I know you said trust is or vibe is a little bit different emotion, but they run pretty close to each other, right?
Oh, sure, of course. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's all part of the package deal. So if you think of human experience, it's multifaceted. One facet is emotion, one facet is intuition, one facet is the vibe, one facet is cognitive processing, so on and so on and so on.
Right. And are the intuit I know I had asked earlier which one is the strongest, but it feels like most of my life I think intuition guides me.
Hmm.
Right. Obviously, like my conscious thoughts will as well. But like I'm usually going off like is gut reaction a vibe?
Sure. Well, I would say gut reaction and intuition are the same thing,
Okay.
right? Now, from there, though, so I think of intuition or your gut reaction kind of more internal processing
Mm-hmm.
in relationship to the wider environment, where the vibe is more of an external thing that's coming off your body, or bodies in the plural, my body, your body, etc.
Okay.
Right? But they mutually inform each other, right? So usually, from my experience, those who are more intuitive are also more attuned to the vibe and vice versa,
Gotcha.
like two sides of the same coin.
Now, is a vibe something that's measurable? Because like you hear a lot of stuff anymore about like vibration frequencies and stuff like that.
Right? Yeah.
Like like
Right.
like it was like 432 hertz is like some sort of special one. I don't know what that one does, but I've heard it before. Like
Right.
like it's a vibration that's going into your body. Like you're not emanating, it's
Right.
coming into you, and maybe you just recycle that and put it back out. Like is that kind of
Right.
how the vibe works? Like if you and I are you're in a great mood, I'm having a shitty day, you show up and your great mood is way stronger than my shitty day. Like
Sure.
before you know it, I might be having a wonderful day just based off of your vibe. Like your vibe will lift me through my problems.
That's a good example. So that example demonstrates that one, the vibe is infectious,
Hmm.
right? And that different strengths of vibes can influence less weaker vibes, right?
Yeah.
So if I have a stronger vibe, you have a weaker vibe. If I'm positive or negative, that will impact you more than your vibe impacting me.
Right. Like kind of like
right?
misery loves company too, right? Like
Right, yeah, 100%. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, totally.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, to your original question in terms of whether it's measurable, I don't know. I mean, like, so there are certain kinds of physical vibrations that can be measured.
Yeah.
That's a fact, right? So, like, all sound is a vibration. That's a physical vibration, like
Right.
literally, right? But the question is, like I was saying earlier, is that the same as the vibe in the way that we're talking about it right now? So, is
Yeah.
it physical, metaphysical, spiritual, scientific, all these kinds of things, right? Generally speaking, though, my initial reaction is like, no, the vibe, the way we're talking about it now, is not measurable, but you can experience it, and there's a certain level of objectivity to it,
Right.
right? Right. So, like you're saying, weaker vibes and stronger vibes. That's something by objectivity. You can see it happening in group dynamics or one-on-one dynamics, or with teams, things like that. When they reach a certain level of synchronicity on the field,
Yeah.
they're in the flow. They're in the moment. They're in the zone, and you can see that and feel that at the same time.
Yeah. And that can change on a dime
Oh,
during the course of
someone
a
gets
game.
sacked, and all of a sudden the vibe's all different. That's how it works, right?
Yeah. So when you're like what you've done a lot of case studies, it sounds like are some more interesting than others? Do you find that they're all kind of common, even though the situation's different? Like the way people react to vibes?
Right. I mean, my own personal bias is that I like really intense experiences,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's why I talk about sports and music concerts. Right? It's one thing having a one-on-one conversation, which can be intense by itself.
Sure.
But you think about the magnitude of 50,000 people all vibing out together. It's hard to duplicate,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
So
one of the
that's
videos
my
I
bias.
watched on you was on the EDM. That's the type of music,
Oh
right?
yeah, 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 yeah,
Right,
yeah,
where
yeah, yeah.
it's a lot of heavy bass. It's taken out
Right.
it's a feeling, right? It's like
Yeah.
you're not there's not a lot of words to the music usually. Like
Right.
it's just
Yeah.
kind of
Right.
it's a feeling, and
Right.
it takes over your body, right?
Right.
Like a song will make you want to dance, right? Like
Sure.
it's hitting
Right.
you with a certain frequency or whatever you want to, however you want to describe it, and
Right.
that gives you a feeling. And then it starts with one person. That person starts dancing, like you go to a wedding, right? Like
Right. 100%. Yeah.
there's the music starts and you got everybody like I don't want to be the first one to dance. You get that one person out there and they start
Yep.
dancing, and next thing you know, it's a party,
It's a party. Now it's a
right?
party. Right. Yeah.
And I've been to weddings where there was no dancing, and there's it's
Boring as hell.
yeah, they're boring, right? So
Yeah.
so you were saying when you were I guess younger, like you like the more intense feeling, and
Right.
is it? Do you find that most people like the more intense stuff? Like I find that they're the more fulfilling for me in the moment, right?
Mhm.
Like a big sports game, or
Right.
like a big event for work, or like I'm going
Mhm.
to this red carpet tonight. It could go either way depending on like
Right.
when
Right.
I walk in. Like everybody could be in a great mood and like was. So is the vibe stronger with people you know, or is it stronger with uh, groups of people? Like
Good
because you
question.
could be at an event with 80,000 people, you don't know anybody, right? And
Mhm.
you could watch that same event at home with people that are all like-minded with the same kind of feeling, and I guess there's different levels to it, right?
That's the easy explanation. Yes, there's different levels, right? And each one of these examples, it's kind of relative to the dynamics of each example.
Right.
Right? So if you're at a large, let's say, work function or sporting event, but like no one knows each other, it's kind of a beat vibe, things like that. It's like, well, that's kind of like that's not an intense vibe. It's kind of a
Yeah.
boring vibe, right? But you could be hanging with five friends though, and that vibe for some reason is stronger, thicker, more
Yeah.
intense than with 100,000 people,
Yeah.
right? It all depends on like the intention you bring to it, your level of comfortability with each other, right? Things that you share in common with each other or don't share in common, right? All these things factor into the vibe,
Hmm.
right? And just tying this back to your personal experience with the gym, I'm assuming you go out of your way to construct a certain kind of experience
Yeah.
for the people that come in here, right?
Absolutely.
And whether you thought about the vibe or not, that's part of it. Like you went out of your way to construct an experience for people as opposed to, hey, my door is open, come on in.
Yeah.
It's very different,
Yeah.
right?
And my gym, we don't
So,
advertise at all. Like it's all word of mouth.
oh, really?
Yeah. I
Interesting.
don't spend a penny on advertising. I got a 4,000 square foot spot and 100 plus people on my team. And it's all either referrals or somehow people find us. And it's that thing like where they come in and they feel it, right? Like you can go train anywhere. You could go learn anywhere. Like you could pick any college
Right.
in Philadelphia. But if the professor has that kind of, and in jujitsu, the instructor is called a professor, by the way. Uh,
Oh, really? I didn't know
yeah.
that. Okay.
And so if the professor of a college or a class, like if that guy has good energy, like that kind of emanates its way out into everyone else, and you'll wind up telling more people about that class, and before you know
Sure.
it, it's packed, right? Like
Right.
certain nights, I know I'm going to have a crowded class. Probably when you're teaching a class, you're like, like, okay, this is Friday. This group is like, this student's in here, this one's over here, and I know this guy is always going to say something stupid, but he cracks me up. Like there's always that guy, right?
Sure. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So,
Totally.
I mean, this goes so many different directions. So, when you're researching the vibe, like, what are some of the more interesting ones that you've had conversations about? I'm sure there's some that stick out in your head, and I'm sure there's some aha moments every now and you're like, I didn't even think of that, and now it presents itself and kind of changes your perspective on it.
Well, actually, I just did a podcast. We recorded about a month ago. But it just came out last week,
Yeah,
and that host in the conversation about vibes reveals that he is autistic, right? And so now we're talking about neurodiversity and whatnot. And his
yeah,
question is like, well, can people who are autistic feel vibes? And I was like, well, that's not for me to say. Like, I'm not autistic, so I don't know for sure.
right.
So I threw it back to him, and as we're going through the examples, like, oh, I guess I do feel vibes, right? But that's an interesting example where your brain wiring. Okay, each person has a different brain wiring,
Yep.
right? And if you're neurodivergent versus neurotypical, your brain just means your brain processes the world
Yeah,
differently than
completely
you,
different.
right? Right. But I thought that was a super interesting question. I'd never thought about it before.
Yeah,
And then I have a good friend, her name is Jen, and she was recently diagnosed with being autistic, and she's about our age, so later in life.
yep,
But she's into the vibe. So I'm like, I used her as an example. I was like, well, she's into the vibe. She knows what I'm talking about,
yeah.
right? And actually, in that conversation, I said, well, it might actually be helpful for autistic people to learn about the vibe because you're processing information at a different level of experience.
Yes. Yeah, it's completely different,
So,
right?
right, right. So I thought that was super interesting, and it's one of the reasons why I do this podcast. Because if when I'm home and I'm writing my stuff, I'm in my own head. Like,
Yeah.
sounds brilliant. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Then you have a conversation with someone,
Yeah.
asks you a question you never thought of. It's like, well, that's when I have fun.
Well,
That's when it's
I
interesting.
think about it with my pets, right? Like I have two dogs. One's a pit bull Dalmatian mix. The other one's a foxhound, the one you saw walk out of the room earlier.
Okay.
And like there are times when I'm losing my shit on my kids for whatever reason they didn't clean up or whatever. Like I'm not yelling at the dog, but my one dog Jersey will just look at me. He's like, "It's time to leave the room." Like he's like, and he's never getting beaten or anything like that. But he's just
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
I don't understand what they're saying in his head.
Right,
But he's like, and he's basing off the vibe, right? He's like, I don't
right,
like where this is going. I should probably go find another spot.
right,
But
right.
I think animals feel it for sure.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and people, babies, right?
Sure.
You
Interesting. Yeah.
you could. I watched a video the other day of a father holding a baby, and the baby's like maybe a year old, and he walks up and he knocks on the wall really hard, and he looks at the baby. He's like, "Oh, are you okay?" And the baby just starts bawling its eyes out, right? Because she's getting the understanding from her dad, like something's wrong. I need to react a certain way. And in reality, the
Right.
kid never touched the wall at all, right? Like he just
Interesting.
picked up on the vibe of the dad. The dad was testing to see
Right.
if
Right. Right.
something
Right.
worked, and it was exactly what it was the child picked up on the vibe of the dad, even though the baby
Sure.
didn't, babies don't understand English at that point, like
Right.
picked up on the vibe and just started freaking out and crying. And then
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
that same video, there's a little kid who falls and he hits his head on like a gate and he hits it hard, right? And like one of those ones where you're like, honestly, I don't mind watching kids fall in videos. Like it's kind of funny sometimes, right? But this kid hits his head, and the reaction from the mom was, "Oh, you fell!" Like it was like in the tone of her voice, and
Right.
and
Right.
the
Right. Right.
and the kid reacted completely different. Where like
Sure.
if it was me, I would have been bawling my eyes out as a child.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
When I think about little kids, right? Like you're
yeah,
talking about, and why they're attracted to some people, but then repelled from other people,
right.
right? You could be pre-verbal, in other words, you don't have language yet. You're that young,
Hmm.
but yet you are attracted to some people and not attracted to other people.
Yeah,
Right? And not necessarily because the one person is a bad person. It's just not the vibe that you're looking for when you're 2 years old in
yeah.
that moment.
It's the energy they're putting
Right,
out.
right, right. And so one could argue that little kids are pretty much attuned to this vibe thing before we even tell them about it,
Yeah. And do you think that goes
right?
away at some point? Like, and then it comes back as you get
Well, I
older?
mean, I think it's always there. It's about whether or not it's cultivated or not,
Yeah. So how do you
right?
cultivate it?
So, well, that's a good question. That's a tough question. So, one of the ways I explain this when people say, "Well, how do I feel a vibe and whatnot?" It's like, well, first thing you want to do is try to be more aware of your body in space, right?
Yeah.
Then be more aware of your surroundings. Where are you? Who are you with?
Mhm.
Right? How are you feeling internally? All those kinds of things. And I say that ties back to what I said earlier, where you're trying to get out of your psychological clutter, right? And be more attuned to what's happening,
Right.
right? And so be aware of your body, be aware of your environment, and then soften your ego again. And that allows like you to experience different things,
Sure.
right? And then from there, try to feel the different vibes of different people.
And you've mentioned ego a few times. So with the ego, how are you defining the ego, and how are you using it in the context that we're talking about with the vibe of pulling it in and out, and either
Right, right.
dialing it down or dialing it up or whatever you need to do?
Well, I don't mean just in terms of like, oh, you have a big ego. I don't mean necessarily
Yeah.
that way,
Yeah,
right?
I didn't take it that way.
Or like, right, right. And I mean you. I wasn't talking about you personally.
No,
Because
no,
I was
no.
talking
No,
about you.
yeah. I'm just
When I say ego, in other words, kind of your little peephole of a mind,
mhm.
right? And we usually attach ourselves to our thoughts. We attach ourselves to our mind, and in doing that, I'm talking about in terms of like Buddhism here.
Right.
When you do that, that's all that exists in the world is your thoughts, your wants, your needs.
Mhm.
But if you detach yourself from your ego, you realize you're part of all that exists,
Right.
right? And that's when you start to feel the vibe when you use more of your intuition, right? And
Yeah.
you allow that stuff to guide you.
Okay. That makes sense. So, like, I mean, if like when we were talking earlier, you mentioned the planet as a vibe, like when everything's mixed together. Like,
Mhm.
what do you think the vibe is right now in the world as an environment? It's chaos, as far as I can
Yeah,
tell.
yeah,
There's a lot going on, and it feels like most people aren't in sync with each other at this point. Like there's feels like there's times when we are, and
mhm,
and you got a ton of social issues, you got political stuff going on, but just people in general, like you take those two things out of the mix, I think most
right.
people kind of get along, and there's a little bit of
I agree.
good intentions towards each other, good vibes. And then
Yeah,
you throw all these things in the mix, and people get caught up in their social media, and they're forced into these boxes, and they tend
yep.
to stay in it because that's all the information you're getting at that time. Like, hey, how do we get more of a synchronized vibe? Like, how do we get back to a better world where everybody's kind of putting their ego away, and we're looking at each other differently, and as a whole, as a group, versus like I'm an individual and I only care about me.
Well, I think that's one of the most important questions we can ask, what you asked right now, in terms of what we're living through,
Yeah,
right? I don't have all the answers. I can't answer the question specifically. That's a major question. But
sure,
the spirit of the question, I think more people should think about. One possible response, though, is to work on yourself,
right,
right? If I had a magic wand, I wish I could just change the whole world. I can't do that. But I
yeah,
can work on myself, like self cultivation, personal development. And I think the vibe is part of that.
yeah,
So, how can I, as an individual, be more honest, have more integrity, uh, be a better listener, right? Be more grounded, more present. And if I can do all of those things in some small way, I'm making the world a better place,
right.
right? Now, having said that, you know, me meditating every morning is not going to stop wars. I'm sorry,
No,
that's not the reality,
no,
right? Having said that, though, I am doing something, right? I do believe that each person has the capacity to make some kind of small positive change in their immediate world.
right.
And if we all did that, the world would be a better place.
Yeah, I think sometimes you just have to take a moment and consider that you're not the only one, right? Like
Right,
like like we're not all everybody wants to be the hero of their own story, but you know, a lot of characters in the story sometimes.
right, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So with the vibe, do you how do you turn a vibe around? Right? Like sometimes like you could be out, you could be having a crappy night. Like, and I'm not saying like just going out to the bars or anything, but like if like you're heading down the wrong path with how you're feeling, like there's got to be ways you can change it around. Like, do you put yourself in a different environment? Do you hang out with different people. Like they say people are the product of the closest people to them, right?
Right.
And if you surround yourself with a bunch of shitheads, you're gonna be a bit of a
And
shithead yourself, most likely,
yep,
right? And then your
yep,
vibe, those feed off each other, and it's just a
right.
yeah, it's a bigger crowd of shitheads.
I think self-awareness and self-reflection are part of that process,
Yeah,
right? Um, so being aware of who you are, being aware of, you know, the people you hang out with, being aware of your intention, the intention of your friends, right? And then having the ability and inner strength to change that if you feel it needs to be changed, which is not easy,
no,
right? So, like, if you're just hanging out on a Friday night and having a bad night, that's one thing. But in terms of your life, right? If you want to change your life and change your vibe, that's something different, and that takes time. It can't be done overnight, right? So, nowadays, oh, take this diet pill and you lose 30 pounds
yeah,
without exercising, whatever. It's like that's not how the world works. I'm sorry, right? Um, Personal change takes time, and changing your vibe takes time. And so that's really taking inventory of yourself. Who am I as a person? How do people respond to me, right? And what kind of vibe do I give off on a regular basis,
hmm
right? And if I find that that vibe is not the vibe I want, or it's not working for me anymore, then you have to like actually work on this. All right, how can I experiment with different kinds of vibes, and then from there see how people respond. If I'm getting a better response that suits me now, who I am now, that's a good thing, and then further develop that,
all right,
right? Uh, and we all change throughout life. I mean, I'm assuming we're about the same age. You live long
yeah,
enough, we all change.
oh,
That's how
for
it works,
sure.
right? Right, right.
I
And I would say shifting your mindset and being aware of yourself are two key aspects of this conversation.
Yeah, and I find that like I had this conversation with somebody earlier. I did another podcast earlier today. The As I was younger, like I wasn't as well. I wasn't as in tune with myself, right?
Sure.
Or self-aware. And I find that the older I get, the more self-aware I become and the more I can control how I react to things. And
Right.
I think I was more influenced by the vibe when I was younger, and now it may not influence me the same way in certain situations.
Sure. Sure. I see what you're saying. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
You have more control over how you respond to that collective vibe at a bar or at the gym or at a restaurant, at the car dealership, whatever the case may be.
Right. Yeah, and I can take a
Yeah.
moment and I can adjust my energy back
Right.
how it's coming in, right? Like you could
Right.
be getting hit with a just 10 vibes at once and you can
Sure.
decide which one you're going to put back out, and if you put one that matches the whatever the good one is in the group
Right.
and everybody does the same, then everybody gets uplifted together.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah.
And I would classify that as having wisdom, right? And as we get older, I would like to think that we learn more about life in general,
Yes.
right? And like a certain level of wisdom. It's like, all right, well, I don't have to respond this way. I actually have control over my vibe, my energy, my personality, right?
Right.
Which is not easy to do. Like, I'm not trying to say this is
No,
easy
no,
because it's
it's
not.
difficult. Like
Right. Yeah.
I know very few people that are. I've gotten self-aware every year. Like if I look at 20 from 30 to
Oh,
20,
yeah.
I thought, oh, 20-year-old little stupid me, right? And then I look at 40-year-old to 30-year-old me, and I'm like, "Ah, that guy was dumb. And now I'm
Right.
50-year-old me to look at 40-year-old me,
Right.
I'm like, that guy was an idiot, right? But I get smarter all the time, and part of that is adjusting the energy that's coming in and out of me,
Yeah.
right? Based on who I'm interacting with, who I'm talking to, the environment that I'm in. And I
Sure.
think that's a learned skill, right?
Yeah.
Like
No, I agree.
learning how you work through a vibe and how you put it back out, right? Like cuz you
Right.
can meet somebody in their 20s and meet them in their 50s, are completely different people. Like
Oh, yeah. 100%.
how do you use it to communicate with people is a big thing, I think,
Sure. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, it's like first being aware of the fact that you're giving off a vibe, and then being aware of the kind of vibe you're giving off. So good vibe, bad vibe, whatever it is,
Right.
right? What characteristics you want to think about, and then learning to reel that back in though, and literally envision yourself having more control over it. If you can envision that, right, then you will be more. You have a certain kind of inner peace to you, and you won't be so influenced by the vibes in the room, by your colleagues, by your friends, by your family members, things like that.
Right. Like I think I've gotten better at choosing the vibes that affect me.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Which is not easy to do.
No.
That's a good skill to have.
Yeah, yeah, and it's an acquired skill, I think.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like I read a few months ago that I think only 30% of people have an inner monologue. Like it's
I
a
learned about that a couple of years ago and it blew me away. Like I was like,
yeah.
how's that
Like what
possible?
did you learn when you read it? Because when I read it, I was just like, what? It explains half the
It
people
was
I
a few
talk
years
to.
back in the classroom. It came up, and a student was like, "Yeah, I don't have an inner monologue." And I went home and looked it up, and like, oh wow, I guess everyone doesn't have that inner monologue.
Right. It's a good portion of people.
I have one. I wish I didn't sometimes, but I
Yeah.
have that inner monologue.
I can't shut up sometimes. Like I'm just talking to myself all day. Like I would love to turn it off one time. Like I could be laying in bed and watching a movie and analyzing the movie, but also having deep thoughts and another thing and still doing
Yeah,
something else. But
yeah,
yeah, so like you're mentioning that being self-aware is part of that. But
right.
if you don't have that inner monologue, where you're constantly talking to yourself and you're maybe separating the two, like what's on the outside and what's on the inside, uh, it would make a lot of this harder to adjust your vibes.
Sure. That's something you would have to ask someone who doesn't have that inner monologue, because I don't know what that's like.
And it's funny
For better or
because
for worse, I have an inner monologue.
I've talked to a lot of people. I haven't met anyone without the inner monologue. And it comes up all the time, and like they talk about like NPCs, like non-playable characters. Like sometimes you meet somebody like that. That's the guy with
Right.
no inner monologue. But when I'm communicating with people, like I find that the vibe I'm putting out controls the conversation a lot of the time. Like, and it's nonverbal, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So
It's
how?
very subtle.
Yes.
It's like an unspoken agreement or an unspoken assumption you share with the other person.
Yeah, and what are some nonverbal ways you can communicate your vibe? Like obviously, like your physical behavior, right?
Mhm.
Maybe what you're wearing, like the concert you're at, like there. It sounds like there's just you could get hit with vibes all day, and they just change moment to moment. It sounds like.
Yeah. No, that's the one way. Yeah, it's a good way of envisioning it. Yes. It's kind of like you're always vibing all the time.
Yeah.
Everyone else is vibing all the time, and somehow we make it all work every day.
Yeah, and you can use it in specific situations where you can change the outcome. I would think as well.
Oh, sure. Now it's not like a magic bullet here, but
No.
the answer is yes. If you become more attuned to vibes, you can use it as a form of communication and know when to turn it on, when to turn it off, when to up it, when to down it, when to interject a certain kind of levity in the situation
Right.
or be more serious. Right? I mean, that's all. It's almost, I guess, like a develop like learning a new language almost.
Yeah.
Right? So I might know one or two words in Spanish, and I can get by on those one or two words.
Right.
But if I develop a vocabulary, I can have a better conversation with people.
Yeah.
Right? Same thing with vibes. Like, all right, so everyone's aware of the vibe to some degree, but if you spend more time thinking about it, processing it, experiencing it, it broadens out your, let's say, vibrational vocabulary, so to speak.
Right. And like for example, like you could be having a conversation with somebody and not everybody's good with deep conversations. And there's always that one guy who's gonna change the subject or make an offhanded joke to change the feeling of the room.
Right.
Right. And then like it could be a funeral, right? And you have somebody
Yeah.
saying something funny about the person who passed. And all of a sudden, everybody they brings a good memory to them, and then the mood of the room changes, even though there's a body sitting right in front of everybody. Like you think about the positive stuff about the person versus the negative, or the fact that they're not
Sure.
gone, and you're embracing the fact that you had whatever time with them, but you have that conversation and you interject that vibe into the moment or the experience of whatever's happening, and it can completely change the room.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
On that note, again, I'll invite your listeners to think for themselves in terms of how much are they influenced on a daily basis by this unspoken vibe.
Right.
Right? So, like the example of the funeral, I think is a good example where everyone's sad and someone cracks a joke and kind of loosens everyone up, which is a good thing. And the feeling changes though, and subconsciously that person probably told that joke because they didn't like that feeling. Of course, no
Yes.
one likes to be sad and miss their loved one,
Right.
right? So all of a sudden they jump on that in a positive way, right? But a lot of that though is part of the vibe conversation that's happening below the surface.
Yeah.
Right? You ever thought about it that kind of way? It's like you were focused on the content of the joke as opposed to the collective mood or collective feeling that
Right.
we're all
And they're
experiencing.
unconsciously doing that
Right,
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 and they're emanating that energy out to
yeah,
change the feeling of
yeah,
whatever they don't like.
right, right.
Yeah.
Now, of course, if you think about on the negative side of this, professional con artists, really good liars, people who know how to emotionally manipulate people. That's also part of the vibe conversation,
Yeah.
right? And that's the negative side. That's a dark side of it,
Oh, for
right?
sure.
Like you can't be a good con artist if you don't know about the vibe. It's not possible.
Yeah, because you're reading the room basically
Right,
when you're
right,
pulling off whatever you're trying to pull off.
right, right,
And that goes back to the comment we had earlier about the used car salesman, right?
right.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
you know that his only goal is to take some money from you at the end of the conversation,
Right,
right?
right,
How you get him there is a whole different approach, right? You can con him, or
right,
you can be brutally on, or not brutally honest, but you can be honest with somebody and
right.
have two different conversations and still get the same result and have a different emotion looking back on what just happened.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So
100%.
when you get better at the understanding the vibe, I would assume that comes with that is a better control of it as well.
Yeah. 100%. Yes. Right. You're more aware of it, right? So once you're aware of something, now you have some control over it,
Yeah.
right? If you have some control, now you can start to think for yourself in terms of how do I want to use this? How do I want to experience this? How can I shield myself or avoid negative vibes, not internalizing negative vibes,
Right.
right? That's all conversation. Yeah.
And it's interesting because when I started, I was co-host of another podcast for 12 years. We had 400 plus episodes.
Oh,
And then I started this one in January by myself, and I'm finding that I'm learning something every time I talk to people,
sure.
and the vibe is kind of the same from a lot of these people, even though the topics are different. Like the last guy I
Interesting.
just talked to was conversation on stoicism,
Oh,
and
interesting. Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
self
sure.
awareness came up in the conversation, introspection, all kinds of stuff, and then 2 weeks ago I spoke to a woman who specialized in nurturing human touch, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
her thing was, not intimate touch, but like just getting back to physical touch. And
Right.
some people need it more than others. And part of that was the awareness as well. And like that
Sure.
touch will change how you feel, and basically changing your vibe. And then I spoke to a woman who was kidnapped as a child by her father. At 3 years old, her mom kidnapped her back, and she had issues with love styles, like her attachment issues and
Sure, she
stuff like
does. Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And that was part of her vibe, right? Like the
Mhm.
things that happen to you over the course of your life, your wisdom, your experience, all that stuff
Yeah.
kind of helps determine your vibe that you put off,
Sure. Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Like if, if
100%.
if
Yeah.
you grew
Yep.
up in a terrible alcohol-filled environment, getting abused all
Sure.
the time, you're gonna have you may not abuse someone, but you're gonna be scarred by it, and that
Yeah.
vibe is picked up by others when you're having conversations with them.
Yeah. So on that note, so we can think about vibes in terms of I'm giving off a vibe like this. I'm giving off a positive vibe, negative vibe, but then also each person is like their personality. They have a core vibe to them,
Yeah,
right? Based on things you're saying, it's like we are basically a product of all the things we experienced in our lives. If we experience different things, we would be different people, right?
right.
Now, with that comes a certain kind of vibe. Now, just like you can change your personality, though, you can also change your vibe, and they're kind of co-constitutive of each other,
Yeah,
right? Uh, so if I am traumatized, if I was abused, and that's leading to negative behavior in my adult life, once I'm aware of that, I can go see a therapist, a counselor, a professional,
right.
help me work through the issues, right? And then from there, I start to change my personality,
Yeah.
and from there, I start to give off a different kind of vibe. It's
And it's interesting
that's
because the conversations that I'm having with folks like you and it's a wide group. Like I consider myself the poor man's Joe Rogan, right? I'm a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. I do color commentating for MMA. I have a podcast, but none of the money, right? And I'm finding that the best way I can describe it is like life is. Remember the digital posters they would sell in Spencer's, right? Like
yeah,
you just kind of walk up and you look at it, like, I don't see anything, right? And then you kind of
right,
stare at it and you relax for a little bit, and you're like, oh, there's a ship over here, there's a lighthouse over
right,
here, and then like these conversations like about the vibe like wasn't on my radar before, but now I'm aware of it, and now that I'm
sure,
aware
right,
of it,
right,
I can't turn it off. I can't make it go away. Like I can get better at controlling it, like how I
Hmm.
emanate and what comes in and out of me. Uh,
Hmm.
but now I'm aware of it. And I'm having all
Right.
these conversations where I'm becoming aware of these little tiny aspects of life that I may have not had before, and they're not going to go away. Like having a conversation with you is going to make me more well rounded when I can identify some of
Sure.
these things and I can take this conversation about vibes and apply it to other parts of my life.
Oh, sure. That's the goal. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So with that understanding, when you're out having these conversations, like what's your ultimate goal with the vibe of the understanding and how can you use it to help others influence their own lives?
Sure. Good question. That's a good question. I guess I'm trying to elevate the consciousness of humanity.
Hmm.
Sounds grandiose and whatnot,
No.
but in small kinds of ways, right? Like, so I have one life to live. There may be other lives I don't know, but I'm here right now,
Right.
right? Do the best I can and try to make the world a better place. And one of the ways that I personally do that is by talking about the vibe, right? I find it intellectually interesting, but also believe that it has the potential to help us be better people, right? And it's like using the word awareness again. Once you're self-aware, you're self-reflective, you understand now how this vibe thing works.
Yeah.
Now you have more control over it, and hopefully that leads you to be more honest, more authentic,
Right.
and give off a better vibe, and then attract better things into your life as well.
Yeah. And you can take that vibe and affect the five closest people to you. But out of
Right,
that,
right,
let's take those five people for instance. You could have those five people influenced by you, but each one of them has five. And if they can
right,
influence another four, and then
right.
those four go and influence, and it's not grandiose. I think it's you have to start somewhere, right?
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
And if you
Yep.
start with the vibe and you can change the way people behave and react and become more control of your thoughts, and you can share that with someone else, and now they have this ability as well to read the room and understand what's going on, and they can share it, and then before you know it, maybe not everybody's so negative to each other,
Sure. Yeah.
right?
That's the goal.
the
Hopefully, yeah.
The world right now is probably more negative than any time I can ever remember in my life,
Oh, yeah. 100%. Yeah,
right? Like
I
there's a
totally
lot of
agree.
hate right now, and if you can be part of that group that gets rid of the hate and anger,
Hmm.
you know, and spread the joy and love with whatever vibes you have, like that's gonna
Right.
it's got to start somewhere, and at some point maybe it snowballs, right? and
Yeah. That's
and
right.
before you know it, it's one person's affecting five, five's affecting 25, 25's
Right.
affecting 225, and before you know it,
Right.
the whole planet's got their own
Sure.
vibe, right? And
Yep.
and and that's kind of what happens in cities, right? Like we were talking about the scale of vibes. Like
Hmm.
Philly's known as the city of brotherly love, but they're not so brotherly and they're not so loving, right? It's kind of an oxymoron. Uh,
Right. Right. Totally. Yeah.
Right, but what Philly's known for being a little bit harder and not as friendly, same as New York. Chicago,
Sure.
the same. You go
Yep.
to, California, right? You got surfer
Very
dudes,
different.
like, it's their vibe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and if
Yeah.
and if you can influence that on any scale, like, you're doing something good.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the point.
and when you obviously, you have colleagues and friends, and is this a big thing with your closest friends? Like, are you all aware of it, or some of these do
Well,
they
I'm like the vibe guy. Like that's
yeah,
like
yeah.
I'm the vibe guy.
There's
Like,
gotta be
oh,
one, right?
Jay's talking about the vibe again.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, you know. Um, so generally speaking, the answer is yes. But having said that, though, how do I put this? No one talks about or thinks about the vibe in the way that I do, and I don't mean that in terms of
Right.
arrogance. It's
You're
just this is
consciously
my thing,
aware of it and thinking,
right? All the time, right?
yeah,
Right. Like I can't turn it off.
right.
Um,
I hope you didn't do
for
that
better
to
or
me. Like that's gonna be my thing now. Like I'm infected with it.
So I mean, some friends are more into it, and I'm more willing, or not more willing, but some friends are more into it. And obviously, with those friends, I talk more about it.
Yeah,
Other friends, like, okay, I kind of get it,
sure.
whatever, next conversation. And I'm cool with that. It's fine. Um, I mean, I've been doing this now for close to 30 years, give or take. And some people are totally into it, and some people are not into it. Like, there
Right.
are vibes people, and there are not vibes people. And that's just the way the world works. And I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah. And you talked about how you like the intense moments when you're picking out social things that you do, is that the vibe is probably obviously part of their
Oh,
decision
sure,
making
yeah,
process on what you're going to do for the weekend or where you're going to go,
right,
and right, like it's
yep,
subconsciously like I'm going to Florida in 2 weeks. And I'm looking forward to sunsets. Right, I'm on the
right,
Gulf
yeah,
Coast. Right, but that's the vibe.
right,
I know I'm gonna be chilled and relaxed that week.
right, 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 right,
Right, and so the vibe has a strong influence on not like where I'm going has a strong vibe, and
yeah,
that's gonna influence my energy and probably when I come back, like how I am for at
yeah,
least a few days.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no doubt. So like we like to go camping a lot. We love camping, like to love the woods. Part of that's because there's no people around. There's no other people around,
Right.
right?
You can't be influenced
So
by the other vibes.
right, right. Now the forest though does have a vibe to itself. I
Sure.
mean, you go into a thick forest, man, there's something going on there,
Yeah.
right? And then the insects and the animals and the sky and the moon at nighttime and the stars, that's all part of the experience. And so, you know, one of the reasons why we go camping is because we can feel our vibes change when we're camping.
Yes.
Same with going to the beach, right? You go to the beach, the Jersey Shore, right? You can feel yourself changing. And then usually in these kind of spots, though, when there are people around, everyone's kind of chill because we're all chilling out together. We're all vibing together on a
Yeah.
kind of
Like
chill
there's
mood.
a beach vibes. Like you see the signs
Right,
at the Jersey Shore, beach vibes.
right,
Like everybody's got those
right, exactly.
posters, right? Or
Right,
wooden, whatever they are.
sure. Then if you're talking about like going on a vacation somewhere, it's like, well, what city we're picking, what part of the country we're picking, because it's going to make you feel a certain kind of way.
Yeah.
Which is not to say you're not going to go sightseeing and all that kind of stuff. That's part of it.
Right.
But that feeling experience is part of why you're choosing to go here
Yeah.
rather than there.
But you're probably like me. You're like, I'm not a big sightseer when I go places.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'll do like one thing a day, but I'm more about being part of the culture, like
yes.
just hanging out in the culture.
Yeah. The vibe. Like
Right.
I enjoy incorporating myself into whatever that environment is.
Yep. Yep.
And like I never thought about that with vacation, like why people vacation certain places or why versus others, right? It's because if you're a workaholic and you're having all your energy's gone into that and you're not interacting with your family and you're like, okay, I need to go somewhere where I can have these feelings and you could go anywhere and change how you feel, but the environment has a strong impact on it, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. So I strangely equally like, let's say, being out in nature, the beach, the forest, things like that, as well as like being in a big city.
Yeah.
Like I like both experiences for different reasons. Right. So just last weekend, I was in New York seeing a friend of mine, and and I lived in New York for 4 years, many years ago, and I could feel my body, my vibe get bigger because it's a bigger city,
Right.
right? And everyone's like, and it's kind of competitive. Like when you're in New York, man, you better bring your A game. You get ran
Yeah.
over. That's how it works,
Yeah.
right? And I feel my vibe adjust to that city experience, and I like that. I mean, it's like a rush. I like it,
Right.
you know?
And then you get home and it stays with you for a few days,
Right, right,
right?
right.
And how you interact with each other. Maybe we do shorter work weeks for people, right? Like
Yeah,
send
I
everybody
think
away
we would
every
all be
weekend.
mentally more healthy. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah,
And again, that comes down to the self-awareness part. Like if you're a workaholic and you're not aware that you're a workaholic, like you can't change how you feel towards or how other people feel towards you, right?
right. You can't turn it off.
Yeah, like I there's a lot of times where I like to surround myself with people of a similar feeling, and I
Sure.
didn't never realize why until we're having this conversation, because like certain people elevate you to a certain feeling, like the city, like you go to New York City, you got to take it up another level. You hang out with certain friends. You gotta take it up another level, right? Because that's the
Right.
vibe of the group, right? Like, it's gonna be that way, like my friends are mean to each other, right? Like, that's our thing,
I,
right?
I know.
Right?
I know what you're talking about.
If you're a stranger and you're watching, you're like, "Oh, that dude just said the meanest thing to you," and you're like, "I don't care." Like, it's whatever. Like, that's just what it is. But when you have an understanding of the vibe, you can change it, right? Like, or
Mhm.
you can disconnect or connect yourself to it.
Right, right. And with the friends example, I'm sure you would agree with this. Like, you have different sets of friends, and each set of friends brings with its own vibe,
Yes.
right? Right. And like I mean, you love them all equally, but it's a different group phenomenon, different
Yeah.
collective vibe pattern
And
because different
I've
people.
always I love when I meet a friend of a friend, right?
Mhm.
I so many times I've met somebody that I've been friends with forever, and I meet a friend that they've been forever friends with, but we've never met. And by the time
Right.
I'm done, I'm like, that's a great person. I want to hang out with them again.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I've been considering having a party for years of just friends of friends. right? Like none of my like close friends are invited, just their like second friend that I had a good time with, like just having a party with all those people and seeing
I
how
bet
that
that would
goes.
be a vibe. That would be
Yes.
an interesting vibe.
Yeah,
That
and
sounds
it
fun.
would be interesting because like so many times, and I don't need to hang out with them again. You just connect with them on that one time. Like I was
Right.
in Home Depot a few weeks ago, and the Temptations were playing, and I was in the tools section, right? I was sitting there, and I'm looking for I think it was tape measures, right? And I'm looking at
Right.
them, and I don't know why one's better than the other, and like they're all measuring. And there's a gentleman standing next to me, and I'm singing the song to myself, and I don't realize I'm doing it. And I turn and I look at him, and he's singing it too, right? And we both looked at each other and we both just kept singing for a minute and then we talked
Right.
about it and we walked away. And I'll never see the guy again. But I shared a
Sure.
moment with somebody because we were vibing on the song that was playing over top. Like
Sure.
subconsciously, I started singing and tapping my toes. And before you know it, the guy next to me was too. And then we had a moment. So for
Sure.
me, like part of the vibe conversation is these moments like or micro moments that you share with people, like where
Yep.
you ever see Fight Club, the movie?
Oh, 100%.
Right, he's on
Watched it
the
100 times.
airplane and he has a conversation with somebody, he talks about, single serving friends,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
single serving friends can elevate or bring you down,
Yep.
and sometimes you just need that one person to meet for a second to change your whole perspective on things.
Sure, sure.
Like, think of somebody who's, like, gonna jump off a bridge, right? And they're ready
Oh,
to
right.
kill
Yeah.
themselves, and somebody comes up and they just give them the words they wanna hear, and they help them change that energy that's going into them and coming out of them, and then next thing you
Sure.
know, they're not willing to jump, and they realize that, "Okay, I do have things to live for," right? And
Sure.
and that's it's a vibe change.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally.
okay. So when you're having these conversations, like, what are some of the more unusual conversations that you've had about vibes and, like, because you can apply this to just about everything you do all day long,
Right.
right?
Mhm. Well, one of the questions that sometimes comes up is where does the conversation end?
Right.
Right. So so obviously people give off vibes. Human beings give off vibes.
Yeah.
And I think most people would agree that animals give off vibes, like your pet dogs, things like that,
Yeah.
right? But then where does it end? So do insects give off a vibe? Do trees give off a vibe,
Right.
right? From there, it's like, well, those are all living creatures. But then do inanimate objects give off vibes? And my own response is like, well, I'm not sure about that, right? And
Right.
maybe it does. I don't know, but like, if I'm looking at a brick building, does that brick building give off a vibe?
Yeah.
Now, the brick building will change my vibe. In other words, I observe the brick building, it alters my psychology, like what I'm thinking about inside my mind, and that automatically changes the vibe I give off. But I'm not sure if the brick building itself gives off a vibe. Now, having said that, I'm not saying it doesn't, but that's like one of the conversations that often comes up
Yeah.
when I'm talking about like where does it begin and end, right? And I don't have an answer for that. I don't know,
Yeah.
right? But I'm hesitant to say that everything gives off a vibe because once you say
I think
everything,
so.
you mean literally everything in the universe,
Yeah.
right? And so again, maybe and there are traditions throughout history that say that yes, it does,
Right, but
right?
like that building could remind you of another building that you had a good experience in,
Right,
right? Or you
right,
you can take a song that you saw at a concert and you just remember like the energy of it,
right,
and then you're driving down the road and it brings back that memory, which brings
sure,
back that vibe, right?
right, right,
And
right. Which is different though than saying that the car itself gives off a vibe.
yeah,
You see what I'm saying? Like
for sure.
there's a difference there.
Yeah,
Right, right, right.
the vibe for me in that
Um,
instance is like a feeling.
right, 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 right. Yeah. Um, and so like these kind of conversations, like man, you can go as far as how deep do you want to get? Like it's an endless well here. Like you can go as
Yeah,
far as you want with this conversation, right? Which
yeah.
is super awesome. I love it. But like when you say what kind of like more unusual conversations, we usually get to this point in the conversation because like we're why not? Like why are we stopping here?
Right.
Just keep going with it.
Yeah. So inanimate objects, like I think that they have a vibe depending on what it
Right?
is. Like I have a picture of Einstein on my wall right here, and he's in a glamour shots pose like this, like he's smiling and everything. And every time I look at that picture, it gives me a feeling. Right?
Sure.
The picture itself doesn't really have a feeling, but the Einstein has a vibe to him, and it's an unusual picture
Oh,
of
sure.
him where you wouldn't normally see him pose like that. It's a painting, and it gives me a feeling. So is it
Sure.
giving me a vibe? I think so.
Okay. Interesting. I mean, and I can see that. I can see your background. You have a bunch of posters and
Yeah,
various paintings and whatnot. Right?
got
Yeah, totally.
skulls everywhere. I got a Buddha. I have this. I have about 57 skulls in this room. I just like them. They remind me that I'm human, and at some point I'm going to be
Sure.
the same as that.
Right. Yeah,
But
totally. Yeah.
but I have like Always Sunny stuff on the wall. I got Einstein. I got Star Wars stuff, and it's just stuff I like. And when people
Right.
come into this room, they'll sit down. I'll just turn it. I have two red chairs where I do
Oh
other
wow.
podcasts, and
Yeah.
like Johnny Cash is on the wall, and I got a bunch of other stuff. Like this room has a feeling to it,
Sure.
right? And you walk
Mhm.
in and you feel it immediately. And then people when they come in here,
Right.
they're very relaxed and they're like, "Oh, what a cool room." Right? And
Right.
and to me, that's the vibe that I want this room to give.
Sure.
Right?
Right.
Even though it's not any particular object in the room giving the vibe, it's the total of all of them put together.
Or right. Everything put together. Right. The overall
Yeah.
atmosphere. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So to constantly construct an atmosphere within your basement there, your recording studio, right? To evoke certain feelings, to evoke certain ideas,
Right.
right? Both in yourself, but also your guests.
Yes.
And again, tying this back to the gym, I'm assuming you do the same thing with your gym, right?
100%.
Right. Right. That's why it has a good vibe because
Yeah.
you constantly do it.
And part of the vibe is like the conversation I get people saying all the time, like during the kids class, parents are sitting off to the side and they're like, "You always play good music," and the music I play is like beach carnival, like boardwalk carnival, stripper club
Interesting.
type music, like the stuff that's got a lot of energy to it, right? Like the tone of it's not necessarily the song, it's the tone and the beat of the song.
Sure.
Right, and
Mhm.
I find that that can uplift the room as well. So, like, there's days where I
Sure.
definitely fail at the music selections. I'm not gonna lie. Like, there's days where I like ADHD kicks in, and it's like one song after another. Nobody gets to listen to
Right.
a
Right.
whole song for the whole class, right? And then other times I just let it run. And usually the times when I let it run, or the time where I've started in the right place or picked the right station on Apple Music or Amazon, it'll affect the room.
Right.
And, I'm one who doesn't hide anything. So if like a music's on, I'll just start dancing. Like I don't care how I behave, you know, like I'm okay with it. And I like to think that that's infectious sometimes.
Sure. It
A-
definitely is. Yeah.
and if you can share that vibe with other people, like regardless of what it is, I think you can definitely influence like the collective vibe.
Sure.
Yeah.
On that, I invite your listeners to think for themselves again about what kind of vibe do they want to construct for themselves on a daily basis, and how can they do that? Is it about shifting their physical environment, like where they live, their house, their bedroom, things like that? Is it about the clothes they wear? Is it about the words and language they use, right? But like all of that will affect your vibe. And so, again, within your available means of your life, how can you construct a better vibe for yourself? And
Right.
then also people that come hang out with you and see you and interact with you, etc.
Yeah. And it's interesting because this is not something I ever thought I would have a conversation about. And which is cool because like it goes back to the part earlier, like where I'm talking about the digital poster where now I see
Right,
vibes up there, right? Like
right,
I was
right,
aware of my own vibes, but not really putting thought out into how the rest of the world affects me. Like think of like when you're shopping, right? Like they construct these stores to send you on a certain path, to
yep,
have you listen to certain music that's going to make you like everything about it is constructed to make you want to purchase, right?
yeah,
And
absolutely,
you're bombarded with stuff all day, and if you can get bombarded with good stuff, right? Like you'll have a different behavior patterns.
yeah,
Like I think what the vibe can it can direct a lot of stuff in your life, right? Like
right,
like how you interact with your family, how you interact at work, just your general mood. Like
right,
there's so much to it, and it like I never broke it down into like, okay, you and I are talking. I'm going to a red carpet event after this, and it's going to be a whole different vibe, right?
very different, very different, yeah,
And if the better I get at adjusting from one vibe to the next, maybe that's part of it too. Like there's because there's a transition, right? Like you can go from like heavy metal concert ends. Like I was at Tim McGraw last week, not heavy metal, but country, and I loved the
right,
song. And before the concert started, the kid next to me, he's like, his dad goes like, all these concerts are 3 hours long. I'm like, great. hour and a half into it, like I'm loving the song, and concert's over. And I'm like, and I walk outside. I'm like, I'm in this great mood, and I'm like, all right,
Yeah,
now
yeah, yeah, yeah.
now it's over, and I'm walking out to the car, and it stuck with me for a little bit, but like the sudden ending of it kind of affected me way more than I thought it would.
Sure. Yeah. So and listening to you like think about the vibe and whatnot. I mean, one of the taglines I have is how do we elevate the vibe to a conscious way of life?
Yeah,
Right. Right. So it's already happening, right? And you can choose to a, to attend to it or not. But once you're aware of it, right, now it's like part of your consciousness.
yeah,
And how do we elevate that to a higher level, right? Rather than just being subtly affected by the vibe, how do we become a maestro of the vibe? Where I'm like not to say in control, I mean in a bad way, but how do I develop more ability to construct certain vibes for myself and for other people?
right. Like and as soon as you started saying it, I saw it was like I'm not good at music. I don't have any skills, like nothing. But if you
Right.
think about being the musician and how you're and the instrument being the vibe
Yeah.
and
Right.
how you're going to play it,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
Like you can definitely change the outcome or the feeling of the event or situation. And after having this conversation with you, I think I'm a little bit more in tune with it. I would think,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
it's not going to go away. Like I hope it's not to the level of yours, to be honest with you, because 'cause it sounds like you can't stop thinking about it. But like I definitely want to be more aware of it and how I interact with the world.
Right.
Right, because to your
Yeah.
point, like if I can change my behaviors and affect a few people, that collective vibe becomes stronger. And let's say all of a sudden Philly, everybody loves each other, right?
Right.
And then people go out and they go out outside of Philly, and now like they're showing love to each other, and then it just kind of
Right.
spreads. So if you're aware of it, you can control how it affects other people. You can control how it affects yourself, and you can use it as a tool to make your life better, it sounds like.
Yeah. That's the whole point. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
that's awesome. I appreciate you coming on here and talking to me about this, and I feel like we could keep going, and if that's okay with you, I don't
Oh,
mind
right.
keeping still going. But so with the vibe, do you do lectures on the vibe, or is it something that's completely separate from your University of Temple University
Oh,
stuff?
so no, like in at Temple University in the classroom. I mean, if it comes up once in a while, I might riff on it for a little bit, but
Right.
I don't teach classes at Temple about the vibe. But outside of Temple, that I can give talks, lectures, workshops, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, whatever people want. It's like send me a few questions, what you're interested in, too, and we can construct some kind of
Okay.
lesson plan, so to speak.
And
Go
what's
from
the
there.
subject that you teach at Temple?
So at Temple, my department is communication and social influence. So think of persuasion and advocacy.
Okay. But
So I mean,
and
they're connected to the vibe, but I
yeah,
don't teach the vibe at.
no, like the vibe's not a terminology that you use during your teaching. It sounds like,
Right.
even
I
though
mean, as
they're
a throwaway
connected,
term, like you're not coming to my class on the vibe at Temple University.
right? Like you're coming for those other topics, but like
Right.
subconsciously, you're kind of teaching it maybe and not putting words
Oh,
to it.
100%. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the students who really get my classes they know what I'm doing in the classroom. It's like, man, that guy's vibe. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah,
Right. It's like how in the classroom, how do I construct a vibe that's inclusive, that we have rapport with each other, and that I try to elevate their intellectual abilities. Though, right? So whatever class I'm teaching, my number one goal is that when you're done in 15 weeks, you're smarter, regardless of the content.
right.
You're a smarter human being,
Sure.
right? And I try to facilitate that in the classroom. And I think my students they get that. They understand what I'm trying to do.
Okay, that's awesome. I'm really glad you came in and talked to me today. I
Yeah, it's been awesome. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I think what I'm doing is I'm having like introductory conversations with people like we're having here, and then I'm gonna
Right.
dwell on stuff for a little while and see where I
Sure.
can implement stuff into my life. And like the conversation I just had with another gentleman on stoicism, like there was things in there I knew I could imply or use right away. And I know there's conversation stuff from this conversation that I can be more aware of, and
Sure.
I can change how I interact with the world with it, right?
Sure.
And if
I
I'm
appreciate
using
it.
it for
Yeah.
positive, like I should get positive out of it, right? Like what I'm putting out, I'm
Hopefully.
hopefully getting
Right. Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's awesome. So where can people find all your stuff? Like I
Sure.
I know you
So
had a
they can
website,
go
the
to
20-minute vibe. Talk about the 20-minute vibe for a sec before we go anywhere
yeah,
else.
yeah. So listeners can go to my website, which is 20minutevibe.com. Again, 20minutevibe.com. And so it's 20 minute vibe spelled out, right? And the whole point of the 20-minute vibe as a project, as a website, is offering up vibe related content for people who are intellectually curious.
Hmm.
And what do I mean by that? In other words, it's called 20-minute vibe because most people aren't going to sit down and study the vibe for 20 or 30 years,
Right.
right? But you got 20 minutes. Can you put in 20 minutes a day
Yeah.
to think about the
You can
vibe,
have it at
experience?
lunchtime, right? Like sitting down while
Right,
you're eating your
right,
food.
right. Driving in the car from one place to the next, right? And so then my job is to help people articulate their experience and their understanding of the vibe, right? So giving definitions, giving examples, case studies, etc. So it's offering information that's accessible in short chunks where
Hmm.
you can process that on a regular basis, right? So the 20-minute vibe. When I say intellectually curious people, I'm not saying you have to be a scholar or an
Right.
academic, but like kind of like you have fun thinking about big ideas.
Yeah.
If so, then 20-minute vibe is for you.
And what are some of the topics that you discuss on the website? Like, is it courses?
Oh,
Like, is it there's
oh,
questions
actually,
answered
so
at the
so
end?
on
Like,
on the websites, I have short essays. I have really short videos, anything from like 3 minutes to 5 minutes. And also have currently two courses up. So they're two self-paced online courses. One's called "What is the Vibe and Introduction?" So it's kind of a philosophical overview of the vibe,
okay,
right? And the other one is about sports and the vibe. I think it's called the Sports Vibe and like the energy of the sports experience, and basically using sports as a base to further understand the vibe. So everyone
hmm,
likes sports, right?
yeah,
It's an easy topic. And now, can you see sports through the lens of the vibe, through the lens of energy, right? So
right.
teams, coaches, things like that. How does it all work in terms of the vibe?
That's awesome. And is there a charge for this? Is it something?
The two courses, I do charge for the course, but they're cheap, like 20 bucks a piece.
Okay,
They're not
that's
expensive.
nothing, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
that's and people spend that not at Starbucks.
yeah, yeah. And so the point with the courses was trying to give a more in-depth explanation of the vibe, right? And again, in a way that's accessible both intellectually, but also in terms of your bank account. I mean,
Yeah,
20 bucks, all
yeah,
you need.
and I find that the more I learn, the more I grow. Right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there who don't want to take a moment to learn anything new, right? And there's
Right.
people in between. But if you have interest in this topic, like it seems like a good one to explore because you can use it to your benefit. You can use it to the
Sure.
benefit of others. You can change the outcome of situations. You can influence situations even though you might not be able to determine the end result, but you could maybe push it in a certain direction. Like if you're doing a job interview and you come in and you're all positive, people are going to look at you different. Right? If you
Right.
come in and you're negative, you're not going to get the job, but because of the energy
Right.
you're putting out and what we put out hopefully comes back to us. But if we can put enough out there, maybe it can spread.
Sure. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you hit on those points because a lot of times the conversation about the vibe is very abstract,
Yeah.
right? But you put very practical terms. Like there's a practical outcome
It's a tool.
to learning about the vibe. Right. It's a tool you can use to improve your life.
Yeah. Like it's not a concrete way of thinking, but it's a feeling, right? You have your with the three is intuition, uh,
Motion and vibes.
emotion, and vibes, and if you can get control of those three and kind of get a good blend of them,
Mhm.
it seems like, it can be used in a real positive way. And,
Yeah.
and I think
I
we're at
mean,
that point in this world where we need more positivity.
oh, 100%. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. That's
Yeah.
hard to argue against. Yeah.
A lot of assholes out there.
No doubt about that. No doubt about that. Yeah.
Well, Jason, they can find you at 20-minute vibe. If they're a student, they can sign up for your courses at Temple
Sure.
University. Do you have any books or articles out there? Any other podcasts you want to mention that you were on that you enjoyed?
All that stuff people can find on my website. So all my videos, all my podcast interviews are on there. Also, if if anyone listening has an actual question they want me to answer, just email me. You can find me email on my website, and I'll happily respond and give you my answer.
Awesome. I really appreciate your time. Hang on one sec. All right.
Yeah.